All right, so this is Breaking Bad Scrum, but I have some things to admit. I have no idea what your bad Scrum looks like. I know what my bad Scrum looks like. I've seen a lot of my own. And so it's hard to prepare this talk, so I didn't bother, actually. And you'll see what that means in a moment. So my name's Ryan Ripley. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I do this podcast, Who Listens to Agile for Humans? Awesome, handful of you. #1 Agile podcast on iTunes. I get a lot of cool people on the show. A lot of speakers here have shown up. They say a lot of stuff. I say very little. Turns into a very good show. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it because I make it. Certification-wise, if you have any questions about certs, I think I have enough of them to answer the questions. It's actually kind of obnoxious, isn't it? I should change that slide. Path 18, this is your conference. So who tweets? Who posts pictures when they tweet? Nice pictures only, please. Okay? It's awful when you get back and you see a picture retweeted 500 times of you looking horrible. It's soul-crushing. So I appreciate the support, but nice pictures. And it also helps the conference. This gets the word out. It shows people not here what they missed. It's a really nice thing to do. So use the hashtag if you tweet, please. Here's my admission. I'm not prepared for this because I don't know what your bad Scrum looks like. So I need your help. Like I could go through a bunch of slides about complexity. I could talk about Scrum in one slide and we could spend time on this. We could talk about the roles and interactions and maybe we'll get there. But I have no clue what you actually need to hear. And so I was thinking to myself, if I sit at home and prepare a talk, what does that look like? What does that remind you of? Because I'm pretending I know everything up front, and then I'm going to deliver it, and I won't know until the end whether or not I succeeded. What does that sound like? Does it sound like a waterfall project? I don't do waterfall. I'm an agilist. And so here's what I'd like to do. As the attendees of this talk, you're now the product owner of the talk. You decide what I will discuss, okay? So I need to build a backlog. Are you with me? We have 90 minutes, so I've never done this in a 90-minute time box, so this will be interesting. I think we can get about 25 questions or issues resolved in an hour and a half. What do you all think? Do you want to try it? Yeah? So, you're not going to be able to see me type, but here's what we need. There are 3 people walking around with microphones. I need 25 of your best questions, and we need to build this quickly so that we can actually get to all of them. So who's a product owner? Who has struggled to build a backlog? A lot of you. What you're about to see is a backlog in 5 minutes that we'll actually use to turn into the product this talk. All right, this should be fun. Who's got my first question? There's one up here. We got 2, 3 over there. So we'll get some microphones out.
Should I go?
Hey, it's who's ever ready. It's just like golf. If you're by your ball, hit it.
So my question is, it's often overlooked that developers sometimes don't want to be self-organized and they want to be command and control. How do you break developers that are in a Scrum environment and want command and control? Does that make sense?
So what to do when devs want to be told what to do.
Perfect.
Got it. Thank you. Who's got number 2?
How would you recommend handling pointless metrics?
How would I handle pointless metrics?
Metrics that add no real value.
I'd stop collecting them.
How do you stop collecting them?
Okay. So your question is, how do we do smart things?
Yes.
Got it. I'm kidding. So handling metrics. Got it. Who's next?
Yeah, my question would be, how do you get people who are largely technical to be involved and interested in owning their own process, a largely non-technical?
So microphone technique, pretend there's like a potato in front of your mouth and then put the mic there. So right up here, a little louder. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, there's a potato in front of my mouth?
Yeah, pretend like a potato and then the mic.
This is just more confusing. Okay, so how do you get technical people, largely developers, to take ownership of their process, a largely non-technical skill?
So how do we get non-technical people to own a process?
Sorry, how do you get technical people to own their own process?
Okay, so how do we get the dev team to own the way they work?
There you go.
Got it. See, but it worked, right? You held it up and we heard you. Dev team to own their process. Who's next?
On a larger scale, how do you take the team agreement or social pact and expand it out to extended teams?
So how do we scale team agreements?
To people outside the team, yes.
So people outside the team would be held to a team agreement.
Having the conversation, whether it's with management or other layers of a large scale.
Oh, so how do we socialize the way we're working? Is that fair?
No, it goes beyond that.
So give me a little context.
So context, in a team agreement, you have 100% agreement on how the team's going to behave.
Sure.
Now, when I want to go outside my team and I have interactions, whether it's with other teams or with management,
Right.
how do I create that same bond?
Got it. Got it. So it's team agreements among multiple teams. We'll start there and work in. All right. Cool. Who's got the next one?
Ryan, I have a potato and I know right where it is.
Excellent.
What is one common practice that you think is actually detrimental that you wish everyone would stop doing? And conversely, what is something you think is underutilized that you wish more people would do?
So one common practice is detrimental, and then one practice that is underutilized?
Yes.
So you wanted a twofer.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you. Who's next?
Right here. How do you build trust between product owner and BA?
How do you build trust between PO and BA?
Yeah.
They should probably stop lying to each other.
Yeah, that would be.
Good question, though. We'll get into that. All right, number 7. We're doing well. Who's next?
How do you work with management that is really only focused on delivering faster?
How do you deal with
Like-
management?
Yeah, how do you teach them?
How do I what?
How do you explain to them that Agile and Scrum is much more than that?
So how to work with management that's laser focused just on delivery. Okay. Cool. Who's next?
I want to learn about how to teach rapidly proper microphone usage. Do you know anything about that?
Potato, and then keep it away.
Awesome. How about...
None of you will forget that. As silly as it is, the next time you're holding the mic, you're going to be like, oh, there's my potato, and it's great.
How
So-
about sprint goals? How do we get teams to actually synthesize or create sprint goals, or do we ignore them like most teams do?
So sprint goals, what's up with that?
I like it.
Cool. Yes, sir.
Increase team engagement, how to get people more engaged in all the different ceremonies so that you don't have a key 2 or 3 people that are driving the bus all the time.
Nice. Who else? Sir.
I want to learn about standardization of processes and practices throughout the organization. Is that something organizations should strive to do, or should that be unique with teams?
Oh, so I actually have to give a real opinion on that one, don't I? I can't just do it depends and move on. That's tough. Yes, so standardization of process across the org. We'll talk about that. Okay, we're on number 11. You guys are doing great. Who's next?
I'd love to hear some tips for coaching teams to be cross-functional.
Nice. Next.
Just some context. I'm right here.
Hi.
Hi. I work in an IT organization that's, our customers are within the same organization. But my question is, how do you write up a business case to develop the product owner role in the organization?
Oh, so making the case for the product owner. Cool. Who's got number 13? Right over here?
Scrum is good, so this isn't an attack on Scrum, but from your opinion, what's next? And do we go further down the path or
Yeah.
off-road?
So what's after Scrum, right? I hope it's more Scrum, but we'll see. 14, we're almost there.
Little
Yes.
bit of context. I have a team of sort of 3 different code paths that was thrown together by management. 2 of the teams could cross-train, but it would be a challenge. The 3rd team is sort of in their own little world. What kind of techniques can I use to help this group coalesce as a team, knowing that management has no intention of breaking them into a separate team?
So how do I help separate teams collaborate?
Well, no,
with
they're
constraints.
They're all in a single team, a single Scrum team. They're
Okay.
working on the same product, but their code bases are different, so
Oh.
they don't share. When they share information in a stand-up, each third is sort of irrelevant to the other 2/3. There's a little bit of cross-training that can happen. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with it, but basically they're somewhat disparate within the same team, and I need to help them coalesce as a unit.
Got it. Thank you. Where are we? I think we've had like here, then there, over there. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to know the checklist. Let's say if a Scrum team is really doing good, they are trying to transition over to the DevOps model.
Yeah.
So what's the checklist gonna be?
The checklist to go from Scrum to DevOps?
Yep.
Okay. The look of panic or nervousness, just ignore that. Wow. I will try to come up with some ideas around that. Who's next? Go ahead.
Hey, what are your top tips for WIP management and encouraging WIP management and pairing in stubborn or resistant Scrum teams?
Nice. Thank you.
Hello. So I have a team that actually is dealing with one board that's Scrum and one board that's Kanban. And I know that with Scrum.org, they've actually brought in that Scrum with Kanban path. So
Right.
is there a way to make that transition towards that model, or your thoughts on just that entire concept of having those 2 separate boards for one team?
Got it. Who's got number? So this is the fun part. People are like, oh, we're running out of slides and I've got questions. We're going to get a flood of these. I'm just waiting for it. Go ahead. And then I think we're here.
Our organization has both agile teams and traditional waterfall teams.
Nice.
So in that situation, tips for planning and prioritizing and organizing dependencies that might be there across teams.
All right, so how to make Scrum and Waterfall play nice together? Got it?
Okay, do you have room for 2 questions?
What's that?
Do you have room for 2 questions?
Yes, you may have 2.
Yes. Okay, first question, as a trainer for all these certifications and having held all of them, am I a Scrum Master just because I hold a certification?
High heat. Am I a Scrum Master because I have a cert?
And then my second question is totally unrelated. Scrum is so much about teams. What do you think is the #1 killer to an effective team?
#1 killer of effective teams, probably death.
Besides death.
Sorry. Those are the jokes. Okay, we're on 21, just a few left. This is that moment. Don't let regret set in when we hit 25. If you have a question, because I'm not doing bonus. All right, I'll probably do bonus, but go ahead.
Could you discuss the agile deal breakers? Like if you can't or won't do these, stick with waterfall.
I didn't catch half that.
What are your agile deal breakers?
My agile deal breakers?
If you can't or won't do these things, then just stick with waterfall.
What are my agile deal breakers? I like that question. It's cool. Sir.
How does Scrum deal with unplanned work?
How does Scrum deal with unplanned work? Got it. Thanks for the question. Who else? We have
Got one right here.
3 slides left.
How can I avoid bad Scrum in an environment where we have a combination of software engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, creating a physical product?
Got it. 24. Sir.
What's your favorite scaling solution and why?
Favorite scaling solution. Wow, you're going to get me in trouble on Twitter with that one. Can't wait for those retweets. Ugh. Yes, and you get 25.
Yay. Woohoo. My question is around something that I think can kill a team, the previous question we had. We have a toxic team member, that's what we call them. And it's just, I'd like your thoughts on how to deal with that. Somebody that just has actually turned the whole team around, a very strong personality, and just dismantled the team.
Got it. Thank you. All right, so we have a backlog, and that took 16 minutes. So the next time someone says we don't know how to build a backlog, it takes too long, we don't know. We just did this as a ballroom of a lot of people. What, 16 minutes? That's pretty impressive, actually. So thank you for that. You are all excellent product owners. Who has regret? Who is sitting there going, I have a question, I didn't ask it, and now I'm mad? Anybody? No hands? There's always one. I will add one more. Hold on. What's that?
It's like being late to stand up. If you have recliners.
No, there's no pillory in Agile.
This was a bonus question.
What's up? What do you got?
What don't you like about Scrum?
What don't I like? I should have just started. I should have hit play. Why don't I ever learn? No, good question. What don't I like? What I don't like is bad Scrum. Does that work? Maybe we'll go deeper. All right, excellent backlog. So let's see if this comes back up. All right, so all I was doing was putting a question per slide. So this is the deck I'll share later. I'm sure it'll be super useful. Should it be? All right, let me hit record. I wasn't planning on it, but who am I to say no? Now it's a podcast. All right, so what to do when devs want to be told what to do? This was a question that was over here somewhere, right? So when I find, yes, so I might ask a follow-up, but what to do when people want to be told what to do? I don't believe that's actually the case. I've heard this before, and I've coached teams before, but what I find is when a team actually, when you think they want to be told what to do, they're afraid to do something because of something else, right? And perhaps it's learned helplessness, perhaps it's too many years under command and control, or perhaps it's because every time they try something different, they get smacked down. And so when I run into this situation, immediately it's a retrospective topic. We have to bring, to steal Jessica's idea, awareness to the situation. We have to make people aware that they're not willing to self-organize or make decisions on their own. We have to figure out where that pressure, pain, resistance is coming from, and we have to solve that impediment very quickly. Otherwise, the team will not self-organize. And honestly, if you don't have a self-organizing team, you're spending a lot of money, time, effort, all of that on Scrum, and you're not getting the value. And so when you say the team wants to be told what to do, I would argue they're afraid to make decisions, and I would try to find out why. Does that help? Cool. Anyone else with follow-up on that? Who's seen that before? Team just won't make decisions. What did it lead to? I'll repeat it, unless we can get him a mic, but what did it lead to?
It led to them falling back on detailed specs and being told what to do because they had been punished in the past for making the wrong technical decisions.
Right. So it's inability to experiment as well. I mean, how many of you realize when you say we encourage experimentation that some of them should fail? And there's going to be misses, and there's going to be things done incorrectly. That's part of Agile. We are learning. The one slide that I like to bring up every once in a while is the Stacy diagram. We're using Scrum because there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And when we don't know something, we have to try something that may or may not be right. And it has to be okay for that to fail. And if it isn't, people fall back to, well, then just tell me what to do. I'm tired of being wrong, and I'm tired of getting punished, and I don't want my bonus to go away, and I don't want to be in trouble, right? When you're adopting Agile and you're saying we're a Scrum team, you're accepting the fact that some things will be wrong. Cool? Thanks for that question. Handling metrics. Sorry, we're doing this on the fly, right? Especially worthless metrics. I find that people want a lot of data, and they're not necessarily sure what they want to do with it. And so instead of looking at the practice or the tool, I try to take the conversation back up to needs. What do you need to know? What decision are you trying to make? What do you value? What principles are you trying to uphold? And when we have that alignment, when we can actually talk to a management person, they are people, by the way, remember, management. So they have their needs, they have their values, they have their principles. When we're aligned on that, when we understand what they're trying to achieve, then we can say, well, does this metric meet that? And if the answer is no, cross it off the list. It's like, yeah, we agree, this one isn't useful. It's really about positioning the conversation for them. Instead of us saying, oh, we have to do this work and the metrics don't matter and it's just a waste, how can I serve you? What is it that you're trying to do? What decision are you trying to make? And then go from there. And I think that's how you actually get away from the whole meaningless metric debate. I think it's also important to actually educate people about metrics. I mean, how many of you realize that your metrics program has a half-life of about 3 months? As soon as the metric becomes the game, the metric's worthless, because teams will game the metric. Developers are excellent at avoiding pain, all right, which is why they'll backslide into command and control comfort, which is why they'll backslide into old practices. They'll avoid the pressure and the pain. It's natural, it's human, right? So your metrics program is worthless after about 3 months. You have to revamp it, find new needs, find new questions. The second you embarrass someone with a metric, it's game over. All right, so when you have the monitor on the wall that says Bob broke the build, guess what happens? The team stops checking code in. And now at the end of the month, you have this massive merge, just disaster and debacle because no one wanted to be pilloried on the monitor, right? So metrics are powerful and they're dangerous. And so I think getting to what the need is and focusing on that gets you away from a lot of these awkward conversations. Does that help? Nice. And so for more information on that whole type of thinking, it's called the SPINE model. 2 really smart guys out of South Africa, Kevin Trethui and Daniel Rowe, came up with it. I just steal it all the time because it's great. Go online, check it out, spinemodel.io, I think. If not, I'll provide a link later. Check it out. It's really helpful with these conversations. How do we get the dev team to own their process? Where did this come from? So when I find that the dev team isn't owning the process, it's because someone else told them what the process is. And a lot of this comes through invitation, right? So if I'm a dev team and I'm told one day, or if I'm on a team and I'm told one day, congratulations, you're now a Scrum developer. Well, I didn't make that choice, so why should I own it, right? So was your team invited to be a Scrum team, or were they told? Voluntold? None? They don't care. All right. They only care. So this is a team that they just want to write code and do nothing else. See, that's interesting. I think that it's a training situation. In your specific edge case, which I think is an edge case, like if they truly don't care how things go, they just want to write code, I think then it's a callback to their responsibilities as a Scrum team, or deciding that they're not one and moving away from the terminology. But they own code quality. They are in service to the product owner. I mean, there's all these facets of being a development team that have nothing to do with code that often don't get talked about, right? But they're there to serve the product owner and to meet their needs through working on items in the backlog that are ordered by value. And so if they're not doing that, and if they're not interested in that, then who do they serve? Would you say your team is just self-serving then? So I think this is, again, a retrospective item and include the product owner and ask the product owner how they feel about this as well. This is a relationship issue, it really sounds like. And most of these answers today, believe it or not, will be people related. This sounds like a very serious one. Is the relationship good with the product owner and the team? And the product owner is good with whatever they ship, no problems? Well, let me ask you this. Let me step back, because perhaps I've assumed too much. Are they shipping at the end of every sprint?
They are.
Is the customer happy?
They've had trouble in the past establishing who their stakeholders are.
So maybe it's vision from the top that causes them not to care about the process at the bottom.
There are myriad issues with the team, but this is the one that so far has been the one that has slowed my progress with them down the most.
The fact they don't own the process.
That they very much just want to heads down code, and they don't. They find no value in any meeting or any kind of.
Well, then that's interesting. So that's different. That's different than where we started. If they're not finding value in the Scrum events, we have to find out why, right? If they're in sprint planning and they're just being given things to work on and told to do this and they don't have input, I'd find that worthless too. Or if they're in a sprint review and it's really just a demo where someone's showing off code or they're getting berated, I wouldn't find value in that either. So this is a conversation, right, with the dev team, with the whole Scrum team actually. Why isn't this valuable to you? What aren't you getting out of this that you need? And if those needs aren't being met, I'm sure they're not going to see the value. I think this is a retro item. And immediately take action as soon as you discover what isn't valuable about it. Does that make sense? Because the events are actually valuable to teams. And if they're not getting that value, something's really misaligned. Yes?
It's not all about Scrum teams, because you go back to the product owner stakeholders, some of this, like for instance, forecasting piece.
Yeah.
It's not just for the team, it's for the business side.
I think there's a ton of issues here. Yeah. There is that view. We do have this accountability to coach out as Scrum Masters to the wider organization, and we also have to make sure that we're interfacing correctly. It sounds like there's a lot of things going on here, though, that I'm not going to be able to pick apart in a 90-minute talk. But I think asking the team why it's not valuable will give you ideas on what to change. Is that cool? All right. Team agreement with multiple teams. So this is interesting. So you have teams that have their own working agreement, and now they have to work with other teams. I think you do the same exercise, actually. I think it's kind of simple. I think you go as a team of teams, like here's team A, team B, team C, and you do the same liftoff exercise. What are our handoffs? What do those look like? How do we interact? How do we cross-train? When do we swap people? Can we swap people? Can we cross-pollinate our teams and make sure that kind of work is happening? Is that valuable? I think it's the same exercise, just a larger audience. Unless, are you talking about 100 teams? That's more difficult.
We have scale. There's scale, but there's also, I was trying to think of a way to use a team agreement or social pact to confirm behavior between groups, and that could be between the teams and management or other teams.
What problem are you solving? What are you seeing that is leading you?
So what I'm seeing is that there's waterfall hangover from middle management. And trying to get middle management to take ownership of the transformation.
Do they know what to do?
That some do, some don't, and that's part of the reason for the discussion.
Because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think the idea of getting the teams to come up with their own working agreements, that could end up getting sabotaged by management who still doesn't get it, right? And so that's risky, in my view. I'm the bull in the china shop sometimes with these transformations. Like if we have to do this, let's just tear the Band-Aid off and not just play around. Like if the management doesn't get it, get them in a room and figure it out. There's great courses on both sides, Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org. We have the CAL course, the PAL course. Put management through a Scrum Master course. Show them what it's like to work like this and really get them leveled up. Middle management, and I've been there. So in my intro, I should talk a little more about the background so it makes sense. 12 years as a Java dev. When you deliver code pretty well, they want you to manage projects. So I did that for a while as a PM. I was a traditional Gantt chart, Microsoft Project PM, sorry. When you deliver projects, what's that?
Recovery.
I'm in recovery, yes. It's 12 steps to Agile Nirvana, right? But went into people management, up to VP level, realized that's not where I want to be. Scrum trainer, Scrum master, do all that stuff. I don't look down on management. I didn't get it at one point either. Who was born Agile? Any of you? No. And actually through public schools and society and political land, whatever it is, we're taught command and control is right. At least that's shifting now. So I never look down on them, but I want to work with them and I want to figure out what they need and then help them see how those needs are met in a Scrum context. Until you solve that, it's pointless to bring someone like me in, another company in to train teams and figure out working agreements. Because that person, who's seen the swoop and poop version of management? They swoop in, they leave a mess, they swoop out. They don't know they're doing that, right? So we tease them a bit. They don't know that that's what they've done. And until they figure that out, any like strong, powerful question I ask or any facilitation technique is going to fall flat. Cool? I kind of bait and switched there or shifted it, but I think that's the issue to look at first. Good? One common practice that is detrimental to a Scrum team, I'm assuming. A common practice that is detrimental to a Scrum team. There's so many. I think one of them would be, so let's do this. Any practice that stops self-organization ends your Scrum practice. And so what I mean is management assigning team members, right? Or a Scrum master, an overzealous Scrum master who solves all the problems for the team. Do you know that most problems and impediments that come up, the development team can actually solve them themselves? They don't need us to do it. We're there to reveal them, but if you're resolving every one of them, you're robbing your team the opportunity to practice self-organization. The daily Scrum is another great opportunity every day to practice self-organization if you as a Scrum master step away from it and let them own their meeting, right? I'll actually turn my back. Like, this is awkward, right? I'll turn my back during the daily Scrum so they don't talk to me. And I don't kick it off. It's like, all right, everybody, today's daily Scrum is going to be led by me. I don't do that. Although it would sound cool, right? That would be great. I let them practice self-organization every day. I get out of their way. So I would say the detrimental thing is anything that stops self-organization. What's underutilized? The Scrum Guide. Seriously. When you get back to your office and you're in, so as a Scrum Master, I'm going to give you what I just said, ignore it for the first 30 seconds of your next daily Scrum. Ask your team, how many of you have read the Scrum Guide? Ask your teams. How many in here have read it? How many of you are actually on a Scrum team? Who hasn't read it and you're on a Scrum team? Hands go up. It's amazing. Ask your teams who's read it. So what's most underutilized? The Scrum Guide. Every time I've asked this, when I've taken on hundreds of teams, I've worked with many, many different people. Every time I ask this question, who's read the Scrum Guide? It's never unanimous. It's not been unanimous yet. So underutilized, Scrum Guide. Cool? All right. How do we build trust between POs and BAs? Trust is transactional, right? All of you show up in this room, you're trusting me to say something valuable to you, and so we have that transaction. If I say something totally crazy or start to put you to sleep, I violate that trust and you leave. And we have these microtransactions every day. I think it's Tim Ottinger and Esther Derby who talk a lot about transactional trust. And so every time we violate that trust or that safety between those two people, any two people, how do we build trust between Scrum Master and PO, management and the Scrum team? We deliver. We add value. We show value. Most importantly, we act as servant leaders. I truly believe this. If you want to build trust in your organization, strive to meet the needs of others in your organization first and follow through on those commitments that you make to serve others. It's hard to trust somebody who's there to support and serve you. Or it's hard to not trust, right? Instead of agendas and pressing your own things forward, serve them, and that builds trust. In your case, I believe was your question, ma'am, the PO and the BA, why aren't they getting along? Like, what's the problem? Like, why don't they trust each other?
I don't think it's necessarily that like a certain amount of serving hasn't been attempted. I'm the BA.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, this is personal.
yeah, so it's personal.
I should ask that first, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Am I about to offend you? Okay.
No, you're not. That's like the immediate first thought is, have you offered yourself up to be available and fulfill what they need? I guess the question isn't just how to build trust between PO and BA, but how to work with someone who is, like, I'm a little micromanaging, so I have to check myself every day.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with someone who is even more micromanaging than you? So
I think,
and build the trust that someone who is so involved, how do you sort of break that down a little bit without crossing a line?
so what I find so fascinating about Scrum is that it really requires us to be human beings, right? There's no more of this, leave your emotions at the door. There's no more of this, don't have all of your baggage. We're people. And in an agile space, and especially Scrum, we have to be able to be people. And so when you've noticed these things in that relationship, have you ever sat down with this person and said, hey, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that you are really not trusting that I'm going to do something. Can you tell me an instance where I violated that trust or not met your expectation because I want to fix that? Who would ever turn that down? Like, who would ever turn down that conversation, right? I'd like to know what I can do to help this. I'd like to know what I can do to make sure that we are working great together. Who's ever going to turn off that conversation? But I find that's very hard to kick off, right? I think Crucial Conversations is a great book here. We have to have, even Radical Candor is another one that's amazing. We have to be able to have these conversations as a Scrum team. We have to be able to sit down and say, we're both human beings. We have our baggage. We have our preferences. We have the way we're wired. But we also have to work together to deliver. How can we do that? But what a weird conversation in the workplace today, right? I would recommend that. Can you do that? Do you believe you could have that conversation with this person? Lovely. And if they just figure out how you can approach it with them. But have those conversations, right? You're now on a Scrum team. You have to have that openness as a Scrum value, right? Follow the values. When I get lost in these relationship things, I think about focus, openness, courage, commitment, and respect. The 5 Scrum values. Who knew that those were the 5 Scrum values? Be honest. There's a lot more Scrum practitioners than hands up. Those things are the lifeblood of Scrum. They influence and drive all of the individuals and interactions and relationships. I think they can save your teams. I think they're that important. We are committed to being open with each other, but we're also to be respectful, right? And if we can't do that, then we have to figure out how to get there because we're not doing Scrum at that point. Cool? Does that help? Does that make anyone feel weird? Is anyone not super happy with that idea? That's one of those that's a little out there. I just want to check in. What do you think? Good? What's that? Got to be done. I agree. Does that help? All right. How to work with management that is delivery-centric. Yeah, that's interesting. I think the first thing you do is deliver. There's no greater builder of trust than shipping. And when you ship frequently, and I've seen this over and over. I took over a project in a previous life where it was way delayed, money was out of control, people were unhappy leaving. The product owner didn't trust IT. In fact, it almost got to fist fights. Like, it was that confrontational, that much bad blood. I just sat down with the product owner. I'm like, what do you want to do? Like, this is my day 2. Like, I just joined the company. I'm like, I know you're upset. This Gantt chart's garbage. Your budget's out of control. What do you want to do? He said, look, I want this one feature so that we can go into a trade show and have a chance of getting some leads. And I asked him, look, if we ship this feature in 2 weeks, this is all we do. Are you happy? He goes, yes, please do it. Went back to the team and said, we have to do this feature in 2 weeks. We have to do it. We have to ship it or else this project's done. And so it turns out it was a very big feature. We sat down, we negotiated with him, we sliced it, and he still didn't believe us. It's like, yeah, fine, take that piece out. Yeah, fine, you're not going to do it. Still in disbelief. At the end of 2 weeks, we showed him the feature. He got it. Now, he didn't just do cartwheels and forgive us and all of that, but it was one step towards a great direction. So he went to the trade show, he got his leads, crisis averted. Over the next 5 or 6 sprints, we delivered 1 to 2 features, and we built that trust. Suddenly, we weren't talking, all of a sudden, the budget problem went away. Isn't it amazing how that happens? When things are going well, the money's not a problem anymore. The deadline discussions stopped. Absolutely stopped. We shipped code, we continually shipped code, high quality stuff. We didn't have a big defect list, we didn't have all these problems. Suddenly, through delivery, we got to talk about what was possible. We got to talk about value. We got to talk about all those fun things that we had not discussed or that team had not discussed, I was new, in months. So delivery. How do you deal with management that is delivery-centric? Ship frequently. Ship high quality. And then you get to have the conversation about other stuff. Meet their needs first, and then make your ask. Does that make sense? Where's that question from? Over there? Are we good? So I did not answer it. Okay, we'll try it.
The question was more around the management saying, be agile, I want my delivery faster. But no, you don't need a full-time Scrum Master or a product owner. You know, like, we don't need those pieces. I just want the faster delivery that comes with Scrum.
Yeah, interesting. Fascinating, actually. So I'm going to steal another thing from Tim. Pretend for a moment, where's the devs in the room? Who's written code? All right, so pretend you've worked all day, right? You've worked all day on a feature, but you forgot to check it into Git or Subversion or CVS, depending the last time you wrote code. You didn't check it into version control. All you have is a printout of a full day's work, okay? How long do you think it would take you to retype that work and get it checked into Git? Anybody? No way. How long would it, unless you're, hunting and pecking on your keyboard? Exactly. Maybe 30, 40 minutes to get it retyped, compiled, and checked in. What were the other 7 hours of your day? Bathrooms, meetings, yes. All right, so what's the other 6 hours of your day? It's thinking. It's thought work. We're not building widgets. We are engaging our brains. We're thinking all day. 30 minutes of thinking, 2 minutes of typing. 20 minutes of thinking, 5 minutes of typing. All day. So what does faster mean? Unless we're going to send them to a typing class. What's that? Can we? Can we shorten that? Maybe a little. Maybe, but that's a sub-optimization, right? And so faster to me is interesting. What I'm after is sooner. And when I hear management talking about faster, I say, I think I'm hearing you say sooner. And they're like, oh, tell me more. What it means is we are shipping smaller features more frequently. So instead of doing the big 1 month feature and shipping at the end, we're breaking that puppy down into weekly increments so they can see something continually, right? So they're getting value sooner. It's in front of the customer sooner. The bulk of the work, the overall work, wasn't any faster though. It takes what it takes. We're just shipping in a way that they see value sooner. And I like to shift that conversation because it puts it back to value instead of dates. Values instead of cost. I want that value on the top of that equation, right? Does that help? Nice. Sprint goals, what's up with that? Who asked about sprint goals? Maybe. Who has a sprint goal? Who uses sprint goals on their Scrum teams? There's more practitioners in here than there are hands. So that's interesting. The purpose of the sprint goal, right? I think it's really misunderstood. A lot of people say the sprint goal is to just clear the sprint backlog, and then you're done. Couldn't be further from the truth, right? So a sprint goal is something that you set, it's your North Star. It's what we're trying to achieve during this sprint. It could be the purpose of this sprint is to have a more secure application. And what that could mean is that we're going to integrate with Google Authenticator with the tool so that we have two-factor authentication. That's our sprint goal. Now, there could be 30 stories on our sprint backlog that get us there. And of those stories, 10 of them would actually satisfy that sprint goal. Does that make sense? It is possible to achieve your sprint goal without completing every story on your sprint backlog. I'd like that to be very, very clear. That's important, all right? Because we're not just trying to plate clear and like get that backlog to empty. We're trying to ship an outcome. We're trying to ship value. But what that sprint goal also does, it gives us reasons to say no. If someone swoops in and says, hey, we want to work on this thing, well, no, because this is what we're working on. And so I take that sprint goal and I put it right on top of our team board. Who uses a team board? Awesome. It goes right on top, in the middle. This is the goal of our sprint. This is why we're here for the next 2 weeks. And whenever anyone would do or recommend anything that would put it in jeopardy, we point at it and we say no. We do nothing as a Scrum team that would put the sprint goal at risk. All right? So it's more than just a statement. The sprint goal is actually kind of our sprint protector. It is how we know we're doing the right things. Does that make sense? So if you're not using them, start. They're wildly important. And it's actually what we're inspecting and adapting during the daily Scrum. We're inspecting and adapting our progress towards the sprint goal every single day. And if you don't have a sprint goal, how can you have your daily Scrum be effective? Cool? Anything else there? Anyone have any insights on sprint goal they'd like to share? Sir.
So one of the things that we've always struggled with sprint goals is that frequently we'll have developers so there'll only be like so much of the work in the sprint backlog that largely focuses on the sprint goal. And so there will be additional work on top of that. Developers on the teams I've worked with don't feel like they're contributing as much if they're unable to contribute to the sprint goal. And so there is parts of that work that is just, they can't move in parallel, or it's like, a too many cooks situation. So that's something that we've struggled with in the past, is how do we get a sprint goal to that kind of a point?
Well, how big is the team?
It's, 6 to 7 people.
6 or 7 people.
Yeah.
And so as a team, they're struggling to come up with a sprint goal that they can all participate and contribute to?
Yeah.
Work with the product owner and figure out what's going on with the stories and the features. I mean, it's interesting that you say that we have a portion of our sprint backlog that's sprint goal related, then we have everything else. I'd be curious to see that and actually kind of dig into what that means. I would imagine it's, if I had to assume, because I've never been to your company, I don't know where you work, but let's pretend that I might have seen this pattern before, where they just took the top 10 things off of the product backlog and shifted it into the sprint backlog and said, this is our sprint. And then tried after the fact to come up with some kind of goal. Does that sound?
So at least what we've done with the sprint goal is that it is used it's used the way it's supposed to be used. Of this is our focus. Once we complete this sprint, we can say that we're successful if we get these things done.
That's excellent. Great.
The rest of it, however, it is still valuable.
Yeah.
But it's stuff that we do need to get done. There is a focus on the other work, but the rest of it, it feels like the rest of it. And so you don't feel like you're helping your team as much as you could be.
What if we a couple ideas, shorten your sprints? Could be. It could help the team actually have to focus on those things that are important. Another idea would be get rid of the rest until you finish that one thing. A common myth is that we only ship at the end of a sprint. You can ship anytime you like. If your feature is ready 3 days into your sprint, ship it. That's awesome. That's continuous delivery. That's what we want. Your sprint review is even more effective and powerful because you've already shipped something. It's already in the market. You can possibly even get market feedback sooner. And that's another idea. Without really seeing all of the interactions, it's hard to, these are general ideas. I'm happy to talk more afterwards, though. Does that help at all?
It is, like you said, it's a complex one, and
it sounds like there's a lot of things going on where you're at. And I think it would be fascinating to get in there and take a look at it. From a general perspective, though, that's why I think the sprint goal is important. If you have extra work, I would figure out why that is.
Yeah.
Like, why is it that we have this unrelated work?
Well, it's to your point, though. Not all work has to serve the sprint goal.
True.
So why do you have any extra work outside of the sprint goal at all?
So are you in this, spend another second here and then we'll pop on, but are you in a situation where you have your A team and B team on the same team? the A players get to work on the important stuff. There's no have and have-nots?
No.
Let's talk more after. I'm kind of curious about this. Yes? Let's get a mic, so.
Sort of within that context, we'll also frequently have X number of stories that go toward the sprint goal, but then there's also tech debt that we bring in.
Sure.
So that's the additional stories. But you started to go somewhere with the creation of the sprint goal and saying, oh, here's these 10 stories, and then we turn this into a sprint goal. Could you finish that thought?
I'm sorry, what was the thought that I let
You
dangle?
started to ask the question of whether they were creating a sprint goal by saying, okay, here's 10 stories.
Yeah.
Let's create a goal. And then you kind of went off a different direction. But that's something that is happening with us.
Yeah.
And I was curious to have you finish that thought, wherever you're going with that.
So I think it's interesting that a lot of development teams do not own their sprint backlog. It's dictated by the order of the product backlog. And that's kind of where I was going with that thought. And what I try to remind teams frequently is that, first of all, the development team owns the sprint backlog. That's theirs. No one can tell them what goes into it. Now, they serve the product owner, and we respect their ordering, but it's also a negotiation, right? So let's say the top 3 items, and then a few don't make sense, but then the next 3 would come together to make an excellent sprint goal. We should have that conversation. And we should say, hey, product owner, is it all right with you if we take the top 3, which we know are important, we skip a few here, we grab the next 2 or 3, we put that as our sprint goal, because that's really valuable and there's some cohesion, there's some grouping there that makes sense. Those are the conversations that I think show an aspect of being a high-performing Scrum team, when there's that negotiation, that give and take, and true ownership by the development team of that sprint backlog. That's really where I was going with that. Instead of just lift and shift the next 10, that turns the dev team into order takers, and I don't think that's the most effective use of those creative people. It turns it into a one-sided relationship, which I don't think is effective. Good? Yeah. How do we increase team engagement? How did I get all of you to ask questions and be engaged, hopefully, in this talk? I've made it about you, right? You had full control over what I talk about for the next hour and a half. I have my own agendas. I would love to sell training classes. I would love to tell you how great Scrum.org is, and it is great. Right? I would love to do all those things. Like, I have my own agendas and goals and desires and needs and the attention seeking of being a speaker and all that stuff, right? But what I've decided to do is give it to you. And hopefully you're engaged because, if anything, you're listening for me to answer your question, right? And so I think first and foremost, if you want a team engaged, figure out what they need, what they want, and create those opportunities and not make it about you. Because I think that's the cleanest way to get engagement. I think also through invitation. Ask them, do you want to work like this? And some people, when I've done this, you go into companies and you get this Scrum team and you can tell there's a few people who are just holding out and they call them the toxic trouble people. It's like, do you want to be here? Do you really like, and they're like, no, I really loved working in my old way. Like, all right, there's a team in the org that's still doing that. Let's go over there and talk to them and see if you can work with them. People don't resist change. All right? This is another Esther Derby line, I think. They resist coercion. If I came down and said, you will do the chicken dance right now, you're not going to do it. You're going to tell me no. And if I persist, you're going to pop me in the mouth. I mean, why would you? Now, if I ask you, hey, do you want to do the chicken dance? What do you think? Still no? Still a no? But at least I didn't get punched. There was no resistance. It's a laugh, and we move on. But when we try to make people into something they're not, when we try to make them do something they don't want to do, defenses are up, game's over. And I think that's the biggest part about engagement. The other part, let's make sure that the product vision is clear. I think the other part, if you really want a dev team to get disengaged, don't show them the impact of their work, right? One of the most invigorating things I've ever done with a dev team is take them to the customer. So I used to work in an area where we had products around trains, right? And so they actually went out, really cool story. They went out to this company. They saw how the company was working. They saw how their software was impacting people. They got excited. They're like, hey, we're helping people. We're changing lives. They actually saw an outdated process that they replaced through software, saved this company tens of millions of dollars. So they're actually able to positively contribute and come up with new ideas. And so I think you get the dev team out in the field for a day or two, show them how their work is changing lives. You will come back with energized people who are excited about doing the work. All right? Does that help? Cool. Sorry, the lights are on me. Sometimes I see a hand and it's not there. Standardization of processes across the org. That question was around middle here. Why? So it's always, a story that always comes back to my head when I get this question. There was a manager who walked through, like there was 10 Scrum teams working. He wanted every team board to be consistent so that he could at a glance get his status updates as he walked. I thought, why do that? It's their board. It's their process, it's their team. The thing that I'm interested in, at the end of every sprint, do those 10 teams have an integrated, high-quality, releasable increment that's ready to go? And if the answer is yes, I don't care what their burn down looks like. If the answer is no, now I want to take a look, right? So I try to allow, the teams own their process, right? Within the bounds of Scrum, they own that. And if they want to use a physical board, a digital board, they want to use sticky notes or 3x5 cards. To me, it doesn't make sense to fight with that. Now, if you're talking about standardization of everyone must use Scrum across the organization, I think that's another interesting slope to go down, right? There are some places where Scrum may or may not be a good fit. There, I said it. I hope I don't lose my license, right? There's some work that I don't think it makes sense. Now, I think someone else brought up the professional Scrum with Kanban bridge that some really smart people at scrum.org and the Kanban community put together. That could be a bridge that I think fixes some of that gap. I think that one's really interesting. But there are some places where I don't think it makes sense. If everything is well understood and known up front, the technology is pretty clear, go build it, right? We're not discovering anymore. But you could even then still use Scrum to see if you're on track. So there's not too many places where I wouldn't use it, but there's some. So even trying to get standard across an org is probably not the right goal. What we're trying to do is ship value frequently and then get feedback about that value, retrospect about how we got that value, and then start again. That's all we're really doing, right? So if you can standardize those principles and values, that's smart. But I think trying to standardize tools and practices, that gets risky. Does that make sense? So standardize the mindset, not the tools. Cool? Yes?
I was just going to add to this that when we have some level of standardization and consistency across teams in a big organization, it just helps that people talk more common language.
Yes.
And it makes it easier for people to understand what others are talking. And also when it comes to, say, release reviews
Yes.
or looking at the metrics and measures, that common language and consistency just helps bring up more issues and risks, in a, with a more clarity and in a less number of verbs, just because of that consistency and scaling across.
Oh, I agree. So we want to use the same language about Scrum. We want to talk, when someone says this is a metric we're using, we should have that alignment on what that is. My standardization comments are more about how the team works. At an organizational level, yes, we have to have that same language, but I would still be hesitant to mandate certain practices just to be consistent. What I look for in consistency is delivery. Can every team ship? And if not, how do we help them? Does that make sense? Cool. But thank you for that add-on. I totally agree. Yes, sir. And then I'm going to have to speed up because, as usual, I got caught on one of these, and we got to go quicker.
So I've always wondered, this is a difficult conversation, especially with the managers, to say, these are the, like, how is that conversation with the managers going to go? Like, these are the disadvantages.
It's every conversation that I've brought up. It's what do you need and how can we serve you? What pressure is coming towards you? How can we help you alleviate that? And if that manager says, well, just curious, I'd like to know how you're doing, point at your board and say, this is where our burn down is. And hey, and that team uses a cumulative flow diagram. Let's go talk about how that works. And it gets back to meeting the need, but to find out what that is, you have to ask. And I find most people don't actually ask. They just assume bad intent, they assume command and control, they make really bad assumptions about management that it kind of pains me a little because they're people too, right? I mean, they're there they have a job to do as well. They're meeting a need the organization wants met. So we just need to ask them what that is. Cool?
Just one last thing. So it goes back to what she was saying, they want that common terminology and metrics, and they want to see that everywhere. So for example, they want to standardize the whole board. The board of every team should have all these columns. It should be the same way.
Yep.
And sometimes it doesn't make sense, but from their point of view, they want to see that same terminology, metrics, and they want to know what cards are at this stage, how many points do we have at this stage.
Yeah, and so we're going to have to work with them and actually treat them like humans and understand they have needs, walk them to every team and say, for this team in this context, this is what made sense, and this is why we work this way, and this is how we're able to ship value every sprint, right? But for this team, it doesn't make sense because they have this different context, they have this different need, but look, they made an adaptation that allows them to ship at every sprint. Like, we have to have those conversations instead of assuming, no, manager, that's not what we're going to do, go away. That doesn't work, right? But when we meet them as human beings and we meet them as with respect and openness that we're called to do as Scrum practitioners, I think you get a better result. Okay? Coaching teams to be cross-functional. This question, when I was typing it in, I thought, wow, this is interesting because teams are just supposed to be cross-functional. Right? So I'm assuming there's a team out there that doesn't have all the skills needed on it to actually ship an increment. So if that's the case, get the skills on the team. I mean, to me, it's if there's a specialist on another team that you need to ship, bring that person into your Scrum team. That's an impediment to your progress. If you now have dependencies on other teams because you have skills that are outside of the team, now you've put delay into your process, right? Whose question was this? Who had the cross-functional? Yeah, can you help me with a little context?
I guess from my perspective, I was thinking more on the end of QA helping with dev tasks and dev helping with QA tasks.
Oh, I like this. So this will go back to the WIP question too, so we might get a 2-for-1 here. So I had this problem on a team, or this opportunity on a team, right? So they were waiting for testing to get done. They were waiting for deployment. I was like, stop. This is one of the few times where I will actually step in and be pretty prescriptive as a Scrum Master, just because I don't know, my coaching skills are limited and that I don't know a better way to get this through permission. And so I will just put a WIP limit of 1 on a sprint and say, for this one sprint, please humor me. Please just let's do 1 feature. And then half the team is like, well, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know. How can you support the effort? How can all of you work together? And then I walk away, and they're mad. They're really, really mad. And eventually I'll come back with suggestions if they ask. But what I found was suddenly some people are writing test cases ahead of the work. Wow, we're doing test first? Test-driven? That's amazing. They're writing test cases, they're writing unit tests, they're putting together the cucumber test, the behavior, all that stuff, that framework that we never have time to do. Suddenly that's all they have time to do, right? People are writing code, people are writing tests, they're doing manual testing, excuse me, and they're working together on the code. So now you have QA and devs pairing, which was amazing. And they actually mobbed too, because otherwise they'd be sitting there bored. So now we have mob programming going on in a Fortune 500 company because a silly Scrum Master set a WIP limit of 1. And what they learned is they're all testers. Everyone's a tester on a team. Everyone's a BA. Everyone's a database dev, everyone's a front-end dev. We can all pair and learn it, right? Sorry. And so setting that WIP limit of 1 got rid of this problem. It just did. And so eventually we picked up 2 features in a sprint, 3 features. We got back to working with more features. But single piece flow is what they call this, taught everyone the necessity of doing all of these things. So now suddenly we get 2 or 3 features a sprint, but it's all well-tested. It's all automated in deployment and regression testing. All those things are just there because they know that they can all do it now. And I think that's a great way to introduce them to cross-functional teams. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Making the case for the product owner. Yeah, this one's interesting too. So how do we tell management that we're going to put someone at the head of the product who's going to make sure it's valuable, who's going to make sure that the customers are happy, who are going to make sure that we're shipping features that people will pay for, who's going to make sure that the dev team's always working on valuable stuff, who's going to answer questions for the dev team so that they're not delayed. Yeah, tough case, right? Seems tough, doesn't it? I think when we frame it in a way of dollars and cents and how the product owner is really the mini CEO of a product and how the product owner is really there to maximize value, to make sure that the dollars that the company's spending, we get the biggest bang for the buck because that person is there working day in and day out with the development team and the customers and the stakeholders. To me, that's an easy case. Who's struggling to make the case? Can we get a mic back there real quick? And then I will speed up. So we're going to do like 12 questions in 24 minutes. This is going to be amazing.
Yeah, so my situation is I work for a multi-hospital health system, and we adopted electronic health record mandated by the government almost a decade ago, and so we've been maintaining that. Well, the operations, meaning the non-IT part, I work for IT. I'm an IT manager slash, I've been working as kind of a Scrum Master as well, trying to get that started, trying to start Agile in our organization. And
nice.
They are, our customers currently are people like directors of lab, direct pharmacists, physicians, and they're still antiquated, and they're not realizing that in an electronic health world, IT is needs to be much more of an interaction with them. And I'm trying to build the case so that each service line could either create some sort of a business analyst, that could be a product owner for us, so that we can interface with them instead of trying to interface with, by proxy, either a committee of people on a call once a week or something like that. We're just not getting enough interaction with them to get good stories, to develop good priorities, and we're really struggling, as you could imagine, without a product owner.
So if I were in your spot, I think I would lead with that a single empowered person who can make decisions about our product keeps us moving forward. And then go into the dollars and cents that I kind of sarcastically laid out, right? But that single empowered person gets rid of rule by committee, which all that is delay in your process. And actually, if you have that now, just keep track of the delays in decisions. All right, this decision took 3 weeks because they wouldn't all agree. But an empowered product owner could have come into consensus in an hour. What did 3 weeks cost us? And just start putting it in that dollar and cents kind of mode, and I think you'll get a product owner pretty quickly. What's after Scrum? Scrum is 20 years old. Were you aware of that? Scrum's 20. Actually, it just turned 21. We took it to Vegas last year. It had a great time, right? Didn't get arrested, though. It was good. I don't know what's next. I'm very excited about professional Scrum with Kanban. I think that is an amazing take on both worlds. And so I'm really fascinated to dig into that and try it out. But it's still Scrum. It's just Scrum and. I think what you're going to start seeing is some mashups of really good ideas playing together well, some bridges being built. But I think Scrum is here for a while. And I'm going to continue to use it and train it and support it because I haven't seen anything better. The instant that I do see something better, I'll hopefully be back here on stage talking about it. My goal is to ship software that makes people's lives better, that brings value, and so far the best way to do it that I've seen is Scrum. But when the new thing comes out, I'll let you know. But I think the PSK, the Professional Scrum with Kanban, is endlessly fascinating to me right now as a possible, not next thing, but a cool take on Scrum. Same team, separate code base, what to do. That's interesting. So you have two teams in a daily Scrum who's getting value out of the discussion, but one team it doesn't make sense. It sounds like you honestly have sub-teams within your Scrum team. And so that could be something to address and look at. It could be interesting to trade code bases, rotate teams. What I find is that the whole team, when you have multiple code bases and teams who are only allowed or interested in different code bases, there's not whole team ownership. And that concept's being violated. So just shift the teams. If team A is working in code base 1 and team B is in code base 2, swap. And for the next few sprints, and maybe just intermingle people. Like wholesale might be risky, but start moving people around. get them familiar with the whole code base so that they can all contribute collaboratively in every Scrum event. Breaking down silos is how you actually repair this problem, because what you've created are silos within a Scrum team. And we need to get rid of those. That's an impediment, in my view. Cool? Checklist of Scrum to DevOps. I have no clue. My take on DevOps, and I wish he'd shut the camera off for like 2 seconds, but he won't. It's all right. No, leave it. It's fine. For me, DevOps is kind of a mystery. In the companies I've worked in, when I've seen them adopt a DevOps model, let me ask all of you, what's the first thing that happens when you start a DevOps program? Anybody? Well, here, every time I've seen it, they separate the dev from the ops, right? Hey, we're the DevOps team. Devs, you're no longer allowed to log into stage or prod. What? DevOps is supposed to be that combination of development and operations. And the first thing they do is throw a wall up. So I'm not sure. Now, from a DevOps perspective, if you're talking about automated deployments, chef scripts, Dockerized containers, Kubernetes, all of that great stuff, I see it all complementary to Scrum. It's enabling automation that allows us to focus on value. So I think Scrum and DevOps is a powerful combination. I don't think it's Scrum to DevOps. So I would say instead of to, I would replace that with and. Does that make sense? Sir? You do what as tech debt?
DevOps with it. Adding DevOps as tech debt into the team backlog.
Sure. I think that's a great way that's the and. I think that's really smart. DevOps is like the word agile, right? Agile means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. DevOps means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. The practices and the principles behind it are wildly valuable. And like I said, I believe they're very congruent with Scrum. It's not a replacement. Does that help? Top tips for WIP management. I think I gave that. Go to single piece flow until the team learns how to work together as a cross-functional team. That's the hot tip for WIP management. And then add one when the team seems ready to take on more work. And then when it seems like they could take on another feature, add one. And then when you add one and they stop delivering, subtract one, right? It's simple math. But I think starting with one and going up teaches a lot of different lessons, and it gives a Scrum Master a lot of good material for retros. Cool? Scrum and Kanban. We covered this too. I think the PSK, there's a guide on scrum.org. Highly recommend you check out Professional Scrum with Kanban. Steve Porter and Daniel Vicanti are the two. Daniel's from the Kanban world. Steve Porter is with scrum.org. Those two really have, I think, pioneered something special there. It's a white paper that's available, or there's actually the PSK guide is available on scrum.org. Check it out. I think it's a really fascinating take on Scrum and Kanban. Yeah.
So, but would it be considered bad Scrum if you have an actual physical board that's like Scrum and then another board or Kanban that would be, that more of configuration and access requests for respective features being delivered and all live in the same team?
Sure. Sounds great. Okay. Is that helping the team deliver?
I think sometimes I think, maybe this is just conversation, right? That sometimes part members of the team or the management that's behind it is assigning work, the PO is assigning work into Kanban will really should be on the
I would work on that. But I think, however, a lot of what we do as Scrum Masters is making things visible, right? I mean, that's what we do. When we talk about the value of a product owner, when we talk about the cost of technical debt, when we write burn down charts, when we put up team boards, make things visible. And so if you found a way to make things visible in that Scrum and Kanban world that's effective and working, go with it, but tweak it. Don't fall in love with it, right? If the board's not, there's been so many times where the team board was just not working and the team asked permission from me, the Scrum Master, can we just tear this thing down and start again? I'm like, why are you asking me? It should already be wrecked. Go tear it down. It's yours. So, but yeah, good question, thanks.
Hey, Ryan, just one more quick thing there.
Yeah.
AJ Reddy wrote about Scrumban a few years back.
Yep.
Just wondering, are there any significant differences between the PSK idea and the Scrumban idea?
I don't know anything about Scrumban. PSK, though, is very fascinating to me. I've met AJ. I'm sure it's a great book. But I like to stay in the world of Scrum. Am I a Scrum Master because I have a cert? Thank you, Jessica. No, you're not. Not at all. So I think training's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't support it, right? I'm one of those weird people where if I don't believe in it, I can't sell it. And I am truly passionate about Scrum, and I believe in the scrum.org message, and I believe in the courses we provide. I think they're excellent. But just because you go through one and complete it and pass the assessment, does that make you a Scrum Master? I don't think so. I think when you have adopted the servant leadership mindset, when you've really dug into what that means to serve others' needs above your own, when you really understand the service levels of a Scrum Master, you know that when you get to that point to where you are really just in that mode of service and you understand your role and you're fulfilling that role and you're really keeping to your accountabilities of Scrum is well understood and enacted by the development or by the Scrum team. The product owner you've helped them come up with good product management techniques and methods to make sure the product backlog is clear, visible, valuable, ordered. When you're doing all those things, then I think you get to call yourself a Scrum Master. But a certification alone does not do it. Fair? All right. And that's another one where the camera should have been off for about. No, I'm actually proud to say that. The cert does not make you anything. What the cert says is that you have taken the initiative to take that first step. And when you pass our assessments, look, there's assessments out there in the community that if you can hold a core temperature of 98 degrees and if your pulse stays pretty consistent, you're going to pass it, right? That's just true. And it used to be you didn't even have to take the assessment to get the cert with a certain organization. I believe in our assessments. The PSM-1, the PSM-2, the PSM-3, very difficult assessments and progressively more difficult, right? When you pass them, you've accomplished something. Now go forth and do good Scrum Master work and become a Scrum Master, okay? Number one killer of effective teams, it's back to when you impede self-organization, you've killed the team, right? When you take away their agency, their power, their decision-making abilities, when they no longer own the how of the work, especially a development team, you've killed it. So we always, as a Scrum Master, I'm always looking for ways to preserve self-organization to make sure that we're not stepping on that ever. What are my Agile deal breakers? I don't know if I have any, but I look at Agile differently, right? So when I think of Agile, I think we're going to try an experiment. We're going to see how it went. We're going to retrospect on how that went. We're going to see what the market thought. We're going to start again. And every day I want to check in and see how things are going with the team as a team member, right? And if we can do that, if we can do those things, like if experimentation is okay and if we're allowed to inspect and adapt, if empiricism is allowed, I think we'll be okay. And I don't know too many places where you can't try it. Now, there are organizations out there that resist this kind of stuff, but I don't know. I'm always willing to try to put empiricism in. I think the deal breaker, let me say this, abusive environments are just a no-go for me. So the case of like pillory in the workplace, abusive management, abusive coworkers, stuff, that to me is a no-go. When we dehumanize one another, Agile can't flourish, right? So it's again, we have to be human beings to each other. Where the Scrum values cannot live, right? So if we're not allowed to focus on our work, if we're not allowed to be open about the things going on around us, if we cannot make a commitment to doing Scrum and to giving our best to our team members, if we don't have the courage to speak truth to power, if we don't have the courage to say no, and if we don't have the respect for others to do those things in respectful ways, that might be a no-go situation too. All right? How does Scrum deal with unplanned work? We have a product owner, and that product owner has the power and the ultimate authority to say no. So when unplanned work tries to sneak in the back door, they say no, because we are focused on our sprint goal. Focus is a Scrum value. And when we make a commitment, we're committing to a sprint goal. And so when we have this unplanned work show up, we point at our sprint goal and say no. That's how we handle it. Now, if the product owner shows up mid-sprint and says, hey, this work came in, we really need to do it, the Scrum team, they're allowed to negotiate the sprint backlog at any time. The development team can say, look, we understand you have this need, let's pull it in, but we've got to drop these 3 features to make it happen. You do that. It's a give and a take, it's a negotiation, but the development team ultimately decides what comes into that backlog. Cool? How can I avoid bad Scrum, especially when creating physical products? Let's start with the first part. How do you avoid bad Scrum? I don't know if you can always avoid it. I think sometimes things will happen. Context will change. The team dynamics will be a little different. Life happens. I think that if you're committed to continuous improvement, and if we're continually doing retrospectives, and if we're continually looking for ways to get better, this problem will work itself out. All right? When I find that teams want to not do retrospectives, I get worried that bad Scrum will creep in quickly. I think the other part is make sure you're living the Scrum values as a Scrum Master. We should be modeling the Scrum values every day and make sure that teams are aware of focus, openness, commitment, courage, and respect. And actually say, hey, thank you for using respect when you answered that difficult question. Not only do we model it, we should praise it, we should call it out, we should highlight it just to make sure that those values are present. If those values are present, you're probably going to avoid bad Scrum. With physical products, I'm not sure why it's much different. It's probably hard to iterate on physical products. There's probably some challenges there, but I think you can still do everything I just said. You know, treat people as people, humanize the work, live the Scrum values, retrospect on your work, whether it's a physical or digital product. Favorite scaling solution? God, there's a few where I wish you'd hit the pause button. I don't like most of them. I actually, I believe that it's hard enough to get teams doing Scrum very well. Like, I would love to see a company, here's my dream situation. Ryan, we want you to come in, we want to learn Scrum really, really well with a handful of teams. We want to get really, really good at it, and maybe 2 years down the line talk about scaling. I'd be excited. That doesn't happen. A lot of people just start immediately with one of the big scaling frameworks, which I won't. I've already gotten myself in enough trouble with other things. I won't call out one by name, but they basically scale up poor practices, and so all you're doing is amplifying bad stuff. I don't think that's smart. If I have to pick one, I really like Nexus. That's not shocking to many people. What I like about Nexus and what Ken Schwaber has done with Nexus, the focus is on descaling. It's decoupling. It's making the work multiple teams, but work that's not coupled to each other. So it's all about cleaning up your processes, your practices, your organization, and then doing the work. And I really like the fact that it takes that, that kind of decomposition type viewpoint. Instead of trying to make everything big, we're trying to make everything smaller. And I really appreciate that about Nexus. You're trying to get me in, who asked that? Yeah, you're trying to get me to say something about safe. I'm not going to do it. But don't do safe. Oh, I did it. Toxic team member, what to do? I think we've covered this. I think we've talked, I've probably bored you with the idea of just having that conversation. What are they after? And what I have found too is, does that person even realize they're being toxic? There are situations that I've been in where I'm talking and someone is just really offended and I have no clue. I will sometimes not have the situational awareness to realize that I've said a trigger word that's just setting somebody off. It happens. I do it. Again, radical candor and crucial conversations have really helped me figure out how to talk to people that I believe are being toxic. I think it's important, too, to verify that. As a Scrum Master, I will see things in the way that I see them. The team may not agree. I might say, hey, I'm seeing this where someone might be dominating. What do you guys think? And they're like, no, we're good. All right, let's move on to something else. I think you have to verify. But if you do have truly a toxic person, sit them down and talk and figure out why they're not being additive. And I think that can go very well, similar to the PO-BA conversation. What need is not being met? How can we help you? And if we can't help you, how can we move you? You know? And then the bonus question, what don't I like about Scrum? What don't I like about Scrum? I like Scrum. The part I don't like is when I see Scrum being used in a way that hurts people. So the compassionate keynote this morning really resonated with me. We really hurt each other at work sometimes. And it really tears at me to see Scrum used in a way that could hurt people. That's what I don't like. And so that's why Breaking Bad Scrum is something that I'm really passionate about. I want to make sure that we're not hurting people as we try to ship software. And so yeah, that would be the one that I just I don't like. Cool? Did we get through it? We did. 4 minutes to spare. Anything else come up? Is there anything else that I can help or serve you with? Or are we done? Going once? Going twice? All right, I'm out. Thank you.